The cold night, the closed doors. The wind howled across the frozen plain, carrying ice and sorrow. The alien widow pulled her thin cloak tighter, her body shaking with every step. Her feet sank into the snow, heavy and slow, as if the ground itself wished to keep her. The night was cruel, the stars hidden behind thick clouds, and the colony walls rose ahead like a fortress of light in endless darkness. She had walked for hours, maybe days. She could no longer tell. Her breath came out in white mist, fading into the night like broken prayers. Once long ago she had walked with her husband, his strong hand holding hers, his voice promising safety. Now she walked alone, a widow of war, unwanted and unseen. At last she reached the first house near the colony's gate. Her trembling hands knocked on the metal door, a weak sound swallowed by the storm. The door opened a little. A face appeared, human eyes peering out, cold and sharp. She whispered, "Please, let me in, I will die in the storm." The human looked at her alien skin, her strange eyes, her hollow cheeks. Fear flickered in his gaze, then disgust. Then the door slammed shut with a heavy sound. She stood there, snow biting into her bones. Her legs carried her to the next house, hope weak but still alive. Again she knocked, again the door opened. This time a woman answered, holding a child close. The widow's voice broke. "I need shelter only for the night." The woman shook her head, pulled her child tighter and whispered, "Go away." Before closing the door, every door became the same story. Knocks, whispers, eyes filled with fear, then rejection. The colony feared her kind, aliens who once fought against them. It did not matter that she was only a widow, broken and lost. It did not matter that she had no weapon, no power, only sorrow. To them, she was still the enemy. The cold grew sharper, stabbing her lungs with every breath. Her knees gave way and she fell into the snow. The world tilted, darkness creeping into her sight. She thought of her husband's face the last moment when fire took him away. She thought of her child, gone long before. Her heart whispered, "So this is the end." But she pushed herself. Up somewhere deep inside, the will to live still burned. She stumbled to another house, barely able to knock. The door opened, but before she could speak, a hand pushed her away. "You should not be here," the man spat. "Go die in the snow, where you belong." And the door locked again. Her body trembled, her tears froze on her cheeks. She pressed her forehead to the cold wall, whispering, "Please, someone, anyone." The colony lights shone bright above, but for her the world was only shadows. Her strength was fading, and the storm showed no mercy. She knew soon her body would fall and never rise. She turned toward the last row of houses. Her steps heavy, her breath broken. The storm screamed in her ears, as if mocking her pain. She thought, perhaps this was fate, to die unremembered in a place that was not her home. She almost stopped, almost let the snow cover her. But then, her hand touched one final door. With the last of her strength, she knocked. Silence. Her heart sank, thinking this door too would stay shut. Then slowly, it opened. A soft light spilled into the storm, warm against her frozen face. A man stood there, a human, his eyes not sharp, with hate but filled with something else. Hesitation, pity, perhaps even courage. He looked at her shivering body, the snow clinging to her cloak, her lips blue with cold. For a moment he said nothing. Then he stepped aside, his voice quiet, but firm. "Come in." Her knees almost gave way, not from weakness but from shock. She had knocked on so many doors and all had been closed. Now one had opened. The human man held out his hand, helping her inside. Warmth wrapped around her as the door closed. Against the storm, she fell to her knees, whispering words she thought she would never say again. "Thank you." Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, a spark of hope had been lit. She did not know this man. She did not know why he chose to help, but in that moment, when every other heart had turned to stone, his heart had opened. And so began the story that would change them both. A story born in the cold night, at the closed doors, when one door finally opened. The storm howled outside, shaking the walls, but inside the small house there was silence. The alien widow sat near the fire, her body wrapped in a blanket the human had given her. Her hands trembled as they held the cup of warm water, steam rising like a fragile dream. She looked around, her eyes wide, still unsure if this was real or another cruel trick of her mind. The human man watched her quietly, his face calm but his thoughts heavy. He was not a hero, not a leader, only a worker in the mines. He had no family, no one waiting for him. Only silence when he returned home each day. Perhaps that was why he opened his door, because loneliness knew the voice of another lonely soul. At last he spoke, his voice steady, but low. "You should rest. The storm will not end until morning." The widow lowered her eyes, shame filling her chest. "I should not be here. Your people will hate you for this." He shrugged, not in pride but in quiet defiance. "They already hate me for other reasons. One more will not matter." She studied him then, his face lined not by age but by hardship. There was a scar across his cheek, old and faded, the mark of war. She wondered what he had lost, and why, after so much loss, he still chose to open his door. Her heart whispered, "Perhaps mercy is not yet gone from this world." He set more wood on the fire, the crackle of flames breaking the silence. The warmth spread slowly, pushing back the bite of the storm. The widow closed her eyes for a moment, her mind drifting to memories of her own home. Her husband's laughter, her child's soft steps, the songs of her people all gone. A sharp ache tore through her and tears slipped down her cheeks, freezing before they fell. The man noticed, but he did not ask questions. Instead, he placed another blanket beside her, silent, steady. It was not kindness of words, but kindness of actions, the kind that mattered most. She whispered, her voice breaking. "Why? Why did you open your door when all others closed theirs?" He paused, staring into the fire, the flames reflected in his eyes. "Because I know what it means to be left outside," he said, his voice carrying weight. She tilted her head, curious, but he gave no more answer, only silence. Yet in that silence she felt something deeper than pity, understanding, shared pain. Outside, footsteps crunched in the snow, faint but near. The man moved quickly to the window, pulling the curtain aside. Two colonists passed. By carrying lanterns, their shadows tall in the storm. They paused, looking toward his house, then moved on, their whispers lost in the wind. The widow's chest tightened. "They will know," she said, fear rising. "They will punish you for helping me." The man turned to her, his face calm but firm. "Let them. I will not let you die in the snow." For the first time since her world had burned, she felt a spark of safety. It was not the kind that came from strong walls or heavy weapons. It was the kind that came from a heart that refused to close. She looked at him, her voice trembling. "You are different from the others." He smiled faintly, not with pride but with sadness. "Different is not always safe, but it is the only way I know." The night deepened, the storm screaming outside like a wounded beast. Inside, the fire glowed warm, painting their faces with light and shadow. The widow leaned against the wall, exhaustion pulling her down. Her eyes grew heavy, her body finally giving in to rest. Before she slipped into sleep, she whispered softly, "Thank you, human." The man sat near the fire, watching the flames dance. He did not answer, but inside his chest something stirred. A question, a memory, a wound that had never healed. He remembered another winter, long ago, when his own brother lay dying. The colony had refused help then. Too, their hearts hardened by fear. He had begged, he had shouted, but every door had closed. By morning his brother was gone, and the man had learned what cruelty meant. Now, as he looked at the alien widow sleeping near his fire, he felt the weight of that memory. Perhaps this was why he opened his door, why he risked the anger of his people, because no one should face the cold alone. No one should die outside when warmth is near. His scar burned, a reminder of war, but his heart burned brighter, a reminder of humanity. The storm raged, the colony slept, and in one small house at the edge of the settlement, Two lives had crossed. A widow who had lost everything, and a man who carried silent grief. Neither knew what would come, neither knew the dangers waiting. At dawn, but for this one night in the middle of the storm, hope had taken root, and hope, even in small places, could grow into something stronger than fear. The storm ended with the first light of dawn, but peace did not come. The alien widow opened her eyes to the sound of silence, the kind that feels too heavy. The fire was low, the house cold, and the human man was already awake. He stood at the window watching the colony outside, his shoulders tense. She sat up slowly, the blanket sliding from her shoulders. Her body still ached, but the warmth of the night had kept her alive. For a brief moment she felt safe, but the look on his face told her otherwise. Something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked, her voice soft. The man did not turn at once, his eyes fixed on the figures moving beyond the snow. Finally, he said, "They know someone was here, and they are asking questions." Her heart sank, fear crawling back into her chest. "They will come for me." Outside, the colony was waking, but not with kindness. Whispers spread faster than the morning wind. "An alien was seen," one voice said. "She is hiding in someone's home." Another replied. Faces turned, suspicion grew, and shadows stretched long over the streets. By mid-morning, two men passed the human's house, their eyes sharp, their steps slow. They paused at the door, listening, their hands brushing the rifles at their belts. The widow froze, holding her breath, her hands clutching the blanket-like armor. The man stood firm, not moving, until the soldiers walked on, their whispers lost in the wind. The widow lowered her head, her voice breaking. "Because of me, you are in danger." The man shook his head, his tone steady. "Danger has always been here, but mercy is rare." His words gave her little comfort, but still, her heart stirred with something close to hope. As the day passed, the whispers grew into voices, and the voices into threats. Neighbors gathered in small groups, speaking in low tones, glancing at his door. Some said he was a traitor. Some said he had lost his mind. Others said he was cursed, touched by the war that scarred them all. The colony had no room for pity, only rules and fear. That night, the human man stepped outside for supplies. The widow stayed hidden by the fire, her ears straining at every sound. Through the walls she heard laughter, cruel and sharp. "They say he keeps the widow of the enemy," one voice mocked. "They say he lets her sleep under his roof." Another laughed. A third voice spat. "If the council finds out, he will hang." The widow pressed her hand to her chest, her heart racing. She wanted to run, to leave before he lost everything, but her body still trembled from weakness, and her soul carried no strength to face the storm again. Tears filled her eyes, her voice breaking as she whispered to the empty room, "Why do you risk this for me?" When he returned, his arms full of wood and food, she turned to him, her eyes wet. "You should let me go," she said, her voice trembling, "before they destroy you too." He placed the supplies down, his face calm but firm. "You think leaving will save me?" he asked. "No, it will only prove them right." She did not understand, but she felt the weight of his words. Later that night, shadows moved outside his house. The window shook, the sound of glass scratching. The man grabbed his old rifle, though it had not been fired in years. He opened the door quickly, the cold air rushing in. But there was no one, only footprints in the snow, leading back to the colony. He stood in the doorway, his breath steaming in the air. "They are watching us," he said, his voice low. "We must be careful." The widow's body shook, not from the cold but from the truth of his words. Every step she took now was under 100 eyes, every breath a crime to them. Still, in that moment, as the fire burned low, she realized something. Even with the whispers, even with the shadows watching, she was alive. And the man beside her, scarred and silent, had given her that gift. For the first time in many nights, she closed her eyes without fearing the snow. But outside, the colony stirred. The council had already gathered in secret, their voices cold, their decisions sharp. If the man truly hides her, we cannot let "This stand," one said. "She is a danger and he is a traitor," another added. The vote was not yet made, but the outcome was already clear. The whispers would become orders and the shadows would soon take shape. The widow slept in fragile peace, but danger moved closer with every passing hour. And the man, sitting awake by the fire, knew that his choice had bound their fates together. For better or worse, mercy had lit a flame, and flames always draw the darkest shadows. The fire burned low, filling the small house with a gentle glow. The alien widow sat close to it, her eyes lost in the flames. The human man sat across from her, sharpening an old knife with slow, steady strokes. Silence lay between them, heavy and unspoken. At last, the widow broke it, her voice trembling. "You must wonder who I am." The man glanced up, his scar catching the light, but he said nothing. She lowered her gaze, her hands twisting the blanket in her lap. "My name no longer matters. It was taken with my people, but I will tell you what I carry." Her eyes closed, and the fire seemed to fade into memory. "I was once a wife, a mother, a healer of small wounds and broken hearts. Our world was green, filled with rivers that sang and skies that never closed. We did not know fear, not until your people came with fire." The man's jaw tightened, his knife still in his hand. He did not speak, but his silence pressed her to continue. "They came with ships that covered the sun, soldiers that marched without mercy. My husband fought, my child hid, and I prayed to gods who never answered." Tears filled her eyes, but her voice grew sharper. "I remember the sound, the endless thunder of your machines. I remember the smell, smoke, and ash covering the ground where gardens once grew. I remember holding my child, whispering lies that everything would be fine. But when the firestorm ended, my child was gone, my husband gone, and my world silent." Her voice cracked, her body shaking with grief long held. The man put down the knife, his eyes burning in the firelight. He spoke at last, his tone low. "Not all of us agreed with that war." She looked at him, bitterness flickering in her gaze. "But you fought it, did you not?" He nodded once, the scar on his cheek deep in the shadows. "Yes, I fought because I was told it was the only way to survive." She leaned closer, her voice sharp with pain. "And how many widows like me did you make? How many children like mine did you bury under your fire?" His hands clenched, his voice rising for the first time. "And how many brothers like mine did you kill? How many homes like ours did your soldiers burn?" The widow froze, the air heavy with the weight of two broken truths. For a moment only, the fire spoke, crackling softly between them. At last, the man leaned back, his voice quieter. "My brother died in that war. I begged for medicine, for help, but the colony closed its doors. They left him to die, just as they would have left you." The widow's breath caught, the words piercing her heart. In his loss, she saw her own, different yet the same. Grief without mercy. Slowly she whispered, "We are both children of war, carrying wounds that never heal." The man nodded, his eyes distant. "Yes, and the colony only fears more wounds. They do not see the scars already carved into us." Outside, a gust of wind rattled the window, but neither moved. The widow wiped her tears, her voice softer now. "I thought hatred would keep me alive, that anger would carry me through the snow, but it only burns me from the inside." The man sighed, his voice heavy with years. "Hatred is easy, mercy is hard, but mercy is the only thing that can change anything." She looked at him then, really looked, past the scar, past the silence. She saw not just a man, but a broken survivor just like her. Perhaps this was why he opened his door, not because she was alien, not because she was different, but because he recognized the same pain in her eyes that haunted his own. The fire grew low, shadows stretching. Long across the walls, her voice grew faint. "Do you think they will forgive me? Do you think they will forgive you?" He shook his head, his eyes hard. "The colony forgives nothing. It remembers everything, but maybe, just maybe, one act of kindness can grow into something larger than their fear." She pressed the blanket tighter around her shoulders, her body trembling. For the first time in years, she felt the faintest spark of something other than grief. Not peace, not yet, but the beginning of it. and it came not from her people, not from her past, but from this one human who chose mercy over hate. Still, fear lingered, heavy and sharp. The council whispered in secret. Neighbors watched with hungry eyes. She knew they would not stay silent much longer. The storm outside had passed, but a greater storm was rising inside the colony. The widow closed her eyes, resting her head against the wall. The man picked up the knife again, not to sharpen it, but to hold it ready. Both knew that war had followed them into this house, wearing new faces, carrying new threats. But for this one night they shared their memories, their grief, and the fragile hope that mercy could survive in a world built on scars. The days passed slowly, but whispers moved quickly. Every corner of the colony carried the same words, spoken in fear and anger. "They say he hides her," one voice hissed. "They say she eats his food, drinks his water, lives under his roof." Another answered soon. Whispers grew into threats carried by the wind like poison. The alien widow stayed inside, her body weak but healing. She sat near the window, watching shadows gather outside. Children pointed at the house, pulled away by mothers who whispered warnings. Men stood in groups, their eyes sharp, their hands resting on knives and tools. It was no longer a secret. It was a storm waiting to break. The human man returned one evening carrying what little food he had. His face was hard, his steps heavy. "They know," he said simply, placing the supplies on the table. The widow lowered her eyes, guilt stabbing her heart. "Because of me you are hated." He looked at her, his voice steady. "I was hated long before you came." That night, the first threat arrived. A stone crashed against the window, shattering glass. The widow cried out, fear gripping her chest. The man rushed to her side, pulling her away from the shards. Outside, footsteps ran into the dark, laughter echoing like cruel music. On the stone, words were carved. "Alien lover." The man's jaw tightened, but his eyes stayed calm. He boarded the window with wood, his movement steady. The widow whispered, "You cannot fight them all." He answered quietly, "I do not need to fight them all. I only need to stand." But the colony was not finished. The next morning, smoke rose in the air. Someone had set fire to his shed, burning his tools and stores. He put out the flames with water, coughing in the ash. Neighbors watched from a distance, their faces blank, their silence sharper than knives. The council called for him, a summons carried by soldiers with stern eyes. He stood before them, the widow hidden at home. The council leader's voice rang cold. "We hear you shelter an enemy." The man's reply was calm but firm. "I shelter a widow, not a soldier, not a threat. Only a soul left to die in the snow." The council murmured, anger and fear clashing. One man shouted, "If we allow one, more will come, then the war returns." Another hissed, "The people grow restless, they demand punishment." The leader's eyes narrowed. "You risk everything for a creature that is not one of us." The man stood tall, his voice steady. "If we deny mercy, then what are we? Only shadows of the war we claim to have survived." His words left silence in the chamber, but silence was not safety. The council dismissed him, but their eyes promised judgment. He returned home, his steps heavy, his heart heavy. The widow looked at him, fear in her voice. "What did they say?" He shook his head. "Nothing yet, but nothing can turn to everything in a single night." That night the danger came closer. Whispers turned to footsteps, footsteps to fists, fists to fire. The crowd gathered outside his house, torches in their hands, shadows dancing on the walls. Voices shouted, "Throw her out, send her back to the cold. He betrays us all." The widow clung to the blanket, trembling, tears burning her eyes. The man stepped outside, the torchlight painting his face in red and gold. He raised his voice above the storm. "You want me? Here I am, but she stays." The crowd roared, spitting hate, but he did not move. His scar glowed in the firelight, his eyes sharp, his body unyielding. For a moment, the crowd faltered, fear mixing with their rage, but anger is a fire that feeds itself. A hand threw a torch at his door, flames licking the wood. The widow screamed, rushing to put it out, but the man pushed her back. He stamped the fire out with his boots, his hands burning, smoke rising. He stood again, coughing but tall. Is this what we are? Murderers in the night? Children with fire in their hands? The crowd fell silent, his words cutting deep. Some lowered their torches, shame flickering in their eyes. Others turned away, unwilling to face the truth. One by one, the mob broke apart, their courage fading in the face of his defiance. Soon only shadows remained, melting into the night. The widow sank to her knees, sobbing. They will not stop, they will come again. The man placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice firm. Let them come, I will stand again as many times as it takes. Her heart broke at his words, not with sorrow but with something deeper. For the first time since the war, she felt the warmth of courage, not her own, but his, and it lit something inside her. Outside, the colony slept uneasily. Inside, the small house stood scarred but unbroken. The threat was not gone, only waiting. But so too was their will, stronger than fear, stronger than hate. And in that quiet night they both understood. Survival was no longer about living through the cold. It was about standing against the storm that lived inside human hearts. The days after the fire were heavy with silence. No one spoke to the man in the streets. No one traded with him at the market. Eyes followed him, cold and sharp. Whispers trailed his steps like shadows. The colony had judged him already, even before the council gave its word. The widow stayed inside, her heart heavy with guilt. She watched from the window as children were pulled away whenever they came near his home. She heard the mutters outside, cruel words carved with fear. Alien lover, traitor. He will bring death upon us all. Each word pierced her like a blade, each whisper reminding her she did not belong. Then came the knock at the door, not soft like hers had been, but hard and sharp. Soldiers stood outside, their rifles gleaming, their faces hidden behind steel helmets. The council calls for you, they said to the man, their voices like stone. He nodded once, his face calm though his eyes burned. To the widow he whispered, stay here. Do not open the door, no matter what. She wanted to protest, to beg him not to go, but her voice broke. He placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and strong, and then he was gone. The door shut behind him, leaving her in silence once more. The council chamber was full. Leaders seated high, colonists gathered to watch. The air was thick with anger, fear, and the hunger for judgment. The leader stood, his voice ringing. You stand accused of sheltering an enemy. The man did not bow his head, his voice clear. I sheltered a widow, not an enemy. A soul, dying in the snow. Gasps filled the chamber, anger swelled. One counselor shouted, her people burned our homes, killed our families, and you would welcome her into ours? Another hissed, if mercy is shown to one, others will follow. Soon the war will live again within our walls. The man lifted his scarred face, his voice sharp. If we close every door, then what do we become? What are we, if not the same? Cruelty we once fought against? The crowd muttered, divided. Some looked away, shame in their eyes. Others clenched their fists in rage. The leader's gaze hardened. You risk the safety of the colony for a creature who does not belong, for a widow of our enemies, for what reason? The man's voice dropped low, heavy with truth. Because I know the pain of closed doors, I begged once as she begged. I knocked as she knocked, and no one opened for me. My brother died in the cold because mercy was denied. A hush fell, the crowd shifting uneasily. The scar on his face caught the light, a wound of the war they all remembered. At that moment the widow burst into the chamber, soldiers too slow to stop her. Her voice cracked with tears. Do not punish him, punish me. It is my fault. I brought danger to his door. Let your anger fall on me, not on him. The colonists gasped, pulling back as if her sorrow were a weapon. Her knees hit the floor, her hands trembling as she begged. Please let him live. He owes me nothing, but he gave me life. The man turned to her, his eyes wide with pain. Why did you come? She looked at him through tears. Because you should not suffer for my existence. I will not let them break you. The leader's eyes narrowed, his voice sharp. See how she twists him, how she makes him betray his people with her words. Mercy is weakness, and weakness will destroy us all. But a voice rose from the crowd, shaky but strong. Is it weakness to show compassion, or is it strength? Murmurs spread, some nodding, others scowling. The colony divided in the shadows of fire and fear. The council struck the table, silencing the room. The decision is not yours, the leader said. It is ours, and ours, alone. He looked at the man, his voice cold as ice. You will be judged tomorrow before all, and your choice will be weighed, mercy against loyalty, heart against law. The man was dragged back to his house, soldiers guarding the door. The widow sat beside him, her face pale with despair. I tried to save you, she whispered, her voice hollow. But I only made it worse. He shook his head, his voice steady. No, you showed them truth. Whether they accept it or not is their burden, not yours. That night, neither slept. The widow stared into the fire, her heart heavy, her body shaking. She thought of her lost child, her lost husband, her lost world. Now she feared losing the only human who had shown her mercy. Her tears fell silently, her hands clutching the blanket as if it were the last thread of hope. The man sat in silence, his rifle across his lap, his scar burning with memory. He knew tomorrow could be his end. But still he felt no regret. His voice echoed in his chest, a vow spoken only to the fire. If mercy is a crime, then I will pay the price, but I will not close my door. Outside, the colony slept uneasily. Inside, the small house held two souls bound by grief and mercy. The price of compassion was coming, heavy and sharp, and by morning the colony would decide if mercy had a place among them or if fear would rule forever. The morning came with a sky heavy and gray. Snow fell slowly, soft but endless, like the world itself was holding its breath. The colony gathered in the square, torches burning against the cold. Faces were stern, voices low, and eyes fixed on the man who stood before them. He did not bow his head. He did not tremble. The scar across his cheek burned red in the cold. Beside him stood the widow, thin and pale, but her eyes steady with quiet courage. Soldiers held their rifles, the council stood tall, and the people waited for judgment. The leader's voice rang through the square, sharp as ice. This man has sheltered the enemy, he has defied the law, and he has risked the safety of us all. The crowd muttered, some nodding, some turning away. The leader raised his hand. For this crime, he must face the price of mercy. The widow stepped forward, her voice breaking. Punish me, not him. It was I who knocked on his door, I who brought danger. He only gave me warmth. Gasps spread through the crowd. Her hands shook. Her body, weak, but her voice grew stronger. If mercy is a crime, then let me bear it. I have lost everything already. What more can you take from me? The leader's eyes narrowed, but before he could speak, the man stepped beside her. His voice rang clear, steady, and strong. No, if punishment must fall, it falls on me. I made the choice. I opened the door. I would open it again. The crowd stirred, torn between fear and shame. Children clung to their mothers. Men muttered, women wept. The man lifted his scarred face, his voice carrying over the square. Do you not see? The war has ended, but fear keeps it alive. If we cannot show mercy to a widow, then what have we become? What kind of people close their doors to the dying? His words cut through the silence. The torches flickered in the wind, and the crowd shifted uneasily. One old woman stepped forward, her voice trembling. I lost my son in the war, but I cannot watch another mother die in the snow. Mercy is not betrayal. Mercy is the only thing that makes us human. Others murmured, some nodding, some shaking their heads. The council leader slammed his hand on the table, his face dark with anger. We cannot build safety on weakness, he shouted. If we open our doors, the enemy will return, and this colony will fall. The man's voice rose, sharp as fire. Safety built on cruelty is no safety at all. Strength without mercy is nothing but fear wearing armor. The widow looked at him, her eyes wide with tears. In that moment, she saw not just a man, but a beacon standing against the storm. And the people saw him too, scarred but unbroken, defiant in the face of hate. The silence grew heavy. The crowd divided. Then, slowly, a farmer stepped forward, dropping his torch into the snow. "I will not burn my neighbor's house for kindness," he said. Another followed, and another, torches falling into the snow one by one. The fire died, leaving only smoke and cold air. The leader's face twisted with fury, his voice sharp. "You are fools, you invite death upon us all." But his words no longer carried the same weight. The people's eyes had changed, softened, awakened. They had seen the widow's tears, the man's courage, and their own fear reflected back at them. The man turned to the crowd, his voice steady. "The war took much from us all, but if we let fear take the rest, then it wins forever. Let mercy be our answer, not hate." The widow bowed her head, whispering, "He saved me, but perhaps he has saved you too." At last the council could not stand against the people. The leader hissed his judgment. "Very well, she may stay, but her blood is on your hands." The man did not flinch, his reply calm. "So be it. I will carry it proudly." The widow's knees gave way, relief crashing over her. She pressed her hands to her face, tears falling into the snow. The man reached down, lifting her gently, his touch steady. Together they stood before the colony, not enemies, not strangers, but survivors. The storm raged above, but in the square a fragile peace was born. The people dispersed slowly, whispers fading into silence. The torches were gone, the fire out, but a new flame lived quietly in their hearts. A flame of compassion, small but real. That night back in his house, the widow sat by the fire once more, her voice soft. "You risked everything, and still you did not let go." The man looked at her, his face calm, his words quiet. "Because if mercy dies, then humanity dies with it." Outside, snow fell gently, covering the scars of the day. Inside, two souls sat in silence, bound not by blood, not by race, but by choice. The choice to open a door when all others closed. The choice to stand when all others turned away. The choice to believe that even in the coldest night, mercy could still burn brighter than fear.